Well, David Bowie was much more than a musician. He was an icon of the 20th and 21st centuries who bestrode the worlds of music, art, film and fashion. I've been speaking to a man who knew him well, Irish journalist and musician BP Fallon. I asked him what Bowie meant to him and what set him apart from others.
David Bowie, throughout the years, never became an old fart. You know, he continually reinvented himself and thus his audience. Because it's not a solo thing, it's all of us together, we're all in this together, you know. Because when you grow up with somebody, and we grew up with David Bowie, you feel for them. And you don't really realise how much you feel for them until a situation like this. And David Bowie, you know, he didn't go into panto, you know, he was the hard-edged hippie with Space Oddity. He was the transsexual, transmogrified spaceman, lunatic with Ziggy Stardust. He was the white soul boy with American Soul. He was the drum and bass guy with Trent Reznor. And he always had mystery, and he had imagination, and he had danger, and he had daring, and he had exploration.
Aging gracefully is not an easy thing to do. Evolving in a credible way is not an easy thing to do. How did he find it so easy to do that? Well,
I would respond by saying aging disgracefully is much more of a valid thing, because what happens is people get, as they go along, very often the edges go and they get boring and they turn into old farts. Why is so much of the world upset today about David Bowie? It's because, as I say, they grew up with him, and they're not similar artists at all, but when Cilla Black, bless her, died not long ago, there was a huge outpouring of grief, and people were really surprised that they cared about Cilla, but again, they'd grown up with her. And we've seen Bowie through all these different imagings, a man with 1 trillion faces, but every one of them real. No fakery except fakery.
It's an amazing thing that there is this deep-seated love among so many people for him, given the fact that his music and his image at times wasn't easily digestible. Sometimes he made music that was perhaps hard to listen to. It took effort to understand what he was trying to do.
Well, with respect, that depends on where you're coming from. And that would be one of his many strengths, that it wasn't pop turned into pap. It wasn't easy roads always. New roads are more interesting. People listen to music generally for two reasons. One is for the familiarity of content, and the other one is for the danger of adventure. To hear something new, and you take a risk because you may not like it, but you might. It might change your life. For many people, seeing David Bowie on Top of the Pops changed their lives. Like the singer with U2, changed his life.
The David Bowie that we see and hear, was that the real man? Was there any sort of performance in how he put himself across, or was he the work of art himself?
With all of us, there's many different facets of it. As a performer, he had a mask, but the mask, as I alluded to earlier, was not some sort of transient thing. It was part of the projection. You know, he learnt a lot from different people like Andy Warhol and stuff, from his first wife, Angie Bowie, an awful lot. And he was very interested. When you'd meet him, he'd always ask you, what were you listening to? What were you watching? You know, I'm one-dimensional. You can ask me about music and rock and roll and I can respond. But he would ask about paintings, he would ask about furniture, he'd ask about all this sort of stuff. Very, very interested man. And the people who are the most interesting are the people who are the most interested.
It seems that he took that with him to the very end, this engagement with life, this engagement with art. And I think it's probably a good opportunity to look at his most recent piece of work. We have the lead single, Lazarus, which was off the Black Star album, which was released only on Friday. I think we'll take a look at that now.
By the time I got to New York,
I don't know about you, but I find that very powerful to look at. It's clearly a man who's perhaps not very well at that stage, and presumably knew when he was recording that song and that video what was ahead for him.
Correct. I mean, right to the very end, to now and beyond, David Bowie was completely on the button in terms of marketing and projection and salesmanship. Here is the penultimate example. You record a track, Lazarus, when you know that soon you're going to be hanging out with Mick Ronson and Mark Bolan.
If an alien came down to Earth, and David Bowie has been described by many people as alien, how would you describe what he was to that alien? What was his essence?
What would I say to the alien about the alien? I would say, here's a chap that most of us would aspire to have the same sense of imagination and the same sense of putting it out. But we don't either A, have the talent, or B, we're really scared. You see, David Bowie wrote from the point of being an outsider. And by doing so, he became an insider, inside us, in our hearts and our souls and our spirit, and his wonderful songs, and that's why we care about him.